Welcome to Safe Doesn't Scale. I'm your host, David Walsh, founder of Limelight. This show is for marketing and growth leaders with a chip on their shoulder who are tired of playing it safe. I'm so excited today. I've got Casey Hill with me on the pod. We've been friends for a while. We've interacted in different ways. Casey has 26,000 followers on LinkedIn. He is the CMO of DoWhatWorks. Casey, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Where do we want to begin? You've got so much knowledge and expertise, and I was looking at your journey, and there's just so much in that. I want to start with a big question, which is what's not working in B2B right now?
Oh, wow. That is a big question. I think there's a couple large buckets. One is around standard paid channels. So I work with a lot of executives and I've done a ton of experimentation here. And I think conventional bottom of funnel focused ads are just getting more and more expensive across all the major platforms. So I think this is something that's showing diminishing returns. Not that there can't be any utility to very targeted, like very specific retargeting campaigns, but in general, I see those sliding off in a big way. So I think that is definitely one principal category. I think a lot of the classic investments around SEO are changing a lot. We obviously have a
Right.
lot of conversations around GEO and AEO, and this is something that I spend a lot of my time on, running experiments, working with our research team, trying to kind of understand. But a lot of the typical investments in the past of like standard programmatic content around SEO, I think that's just fundamentally had to change, and people are having to take that budget and shift it elsewhere. So I think those are two things that, they jump out to me right away because they're some of the major line items for the largest organizations. Some of the largest organizations, that's where they've been spending 70, 80, sometimes 90% of their budget has been on standard paid ads across the major platforms, LinkedIn, Meta, Google, and then standard SEO investments. Let's show up for branded search, right? And so I think we're seeing a pretty big paradigm shift when the major places that enterprise organizations are investing money is essentially changing.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, listen, we are thinking about this when I started Limelight. We thought about what are marketing leaders struggling with, what are heads of growth struggling with. And it's traditionally and traditional channels are getting worse return on investments and the budgets are staying the same or getting reduced. And so they're trying to do more with less. And they're thinking like, we're getting squeezed and the pressure is on to grow. Where are the opportunities? Where are the pockets to grow? Before we get into your background, and I did some digging on, your journey as founding a gaming company, which I want to come back to. Why don't we tell the audience, what does DoWhatWorks do?
Yeah, so we have a really interesting technology that can essentially see any A/B test on the web run by any brand. So we're not black hat, we're not going back end to like their conversion data, but we use public information, see what brands are testing, and see what they ultimately decide to keep. And then we aggregate that at scale. So our customers can come in, and our customers tend to be like Fortune 500 companies. They can come in, they're trying to redo their homepage, and they say, should I use a video or should I use a static image right at the top? And we can say, hey, we've seen 8,500 tests around that exact thing, those two variables in isolation. And this is the strong data trend that we see. So we help them kind of make more data back decisions when it comes to their testing programs.
When we met quite a while ago now, when you were at Active Campaign, and then, you joined this company, and now what you're doing, you were like, I have a newsletter, go follow it. I started listening and watching and reading your newsletter and your content on LinkedIn. If people don't follow you, 100% go and find Casey on LinkedIn. Some of the teardowns and breakdowns that you do is incredible because I think it comes back to you've got that data, right? That historical data of like, here are things that people are doing differently and here's how they've changed. I know I saw a post from you last week. I can't remember exactly what it was, but you're always posting like risky changes and decisions that companies are doing when
Yeah.
it comes to like pricing pages and other things. What's one or two things that you've been really impressed by recently?
Yeah, well, I want to make one note on this because it's a huge learning and takeaway I've had from LinkedIn, which is our primary growth channel. We drive 40% of our business closed from LinkedIn. What I'll say is that a big learning I had since coming to this company is the importance of novelty and replicability as the two central cogs of content. So when I actually first started, I did something a little different that didn't work as well. So when I first came to the company, I said, I have all this amazing test data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share individual tests. This is what Adobe tested. This is what Nike tested. This is what this other big company tested. And your button should say this text, or you should use this thing. That content actually performed really poorly. And I was scratching my head because I'm like, man, this info is so valuable. Like customers are paying a ton of money to learn these insights. Like, what's the missing piece? And I think the problem was it lacked novelty. It wasn't
Mm.
something unique that they hadn't seen before, right? And so what I actually ended up doing, which has worked way better and has kind of created the funnel that's really working effectively, is I use social as the way to bring people in. And the way that I've done that is find something super unique, novel that people haven't seen before. Here's an AI experiment this company is running. This is how they format it. This is super interesting. I don't make a claim I know this works, right? I'm very open. This is a very interesting thing. Wanted to let people know. Then I also try to focus on replicability, meaning that if I share something that's like very convoluted and complex for someone to replicate, that content does a lot worse than the content that is both novel and someone's like, oh, have AI, the major AI tools summarize my company for a specific use case. That's pretty straightforward, right? Like everyone can read that and go do that in 2 days for themselves. So those 2 points, I think, were a huge learning and win, if you will. So wanted to just kind of first share that on the LinkedIn side because that's such a critical piece. On the website side, I'll tell you two things that surprised me the most. There's so many things, places we could go, but I'll tell you two things that jumped out and surprised me. One is I used to work in a company that was tied to the video space. I've always been quite bullish around video. And when I came in, I saw that there was a volume of tests of on your homepage hero, should you have a video or a static image? And static image kept winning over and over again at a very high percentage. And that
Really?
surprised me. That wasn't what I expected. There's some nuance to this, meaning that, if you are going to use a video, make sure it has autoplay. Static images where they only play when you press tend to do a lot worse. But the finding, and I think the key that I came to understand looking into more of the data, it's around expectation and the challenge on websites you have that someone doesn't know exactly what they're going to get when they click that video. Is it a promo? Is it an explainer? What exactly is it? This is the broad lesson that I think is so critical for teams to take away for their website because it applies to your CTA text, it applies to all the layers of your website. What do I expect is going to happen when I do a thing? And if there's any ambiguity or lack of clarity, that is a huge barrier, right? And so one of the things I just had a chat with a $7.2 billion team, Glean, which is an enterprise SaaS company, and he shared something to me that was like so insightful, and yet so many teams can do it, which is he said, we got over 100% lift in click through on our homepage when we killed learn more. We just killed learn more as a CTA text. We took every instance of learn more and we were more specific. Like read the story, watch the video, see the like whatever the actual thing is, right? That they're going to
That's
then go get next. See pricing, see integrations, whatever it is. Cut learn more, replace it with that. And that specificity drives more clicks. There's less ambiguity because they know what they're going to get. And so I think that is one huge bucket of lessons. The other one I'll say is social proof. This is controversial. This is, something that, jumped out to me. And for folks who follow my content, they're like, Casey, stop talking about social proof. I post so much content around it. But I'll keep it really simple because I think there's some really interesting nuggets here. The challenge that we have around social proof, the bar of trust is higher. It's harder than it was
right.
before, right? So when I came in, what I found is that static logo bars, i.e., logo bars where you can't click into the logo, you can't validate it, you can't draw any additional context, those perform very poorly when A B tested directly. Even literally just testing having it, not having it. But also when testing having it versus more contextualized testimonials, having it versus a video testimonial. The key learning here is that the bar of trust is higher. The bar of validation is higher. So anyone can go take logos. I can go to my website and I can go take a look and I can just say, I work with all the top companies in the world, right? Like I can just go post that. But what creates trust is if I have an image of the CPO at OpenAI and he's like sitting there talking about, I love DoWhatWorks for this and this, that builds trust, right? It's
Right.
harder
Couldn't
to
agree
fake.
more.
There's a cost signaling, right?
I couldn't agree more. I feel like people watching this are about to get a knowledge dump from you on all of the learnings and all of the exciting things that companies are doing differently. I selfishly have got to spend some time with you in multiple conversations. You've been very, I would say, like generous with your time with the team at Limelight. And every time I have one of these sessions with you, I'm like, oh my God, we should be doing these 10 things differently. So I feel like there's just so much knowledge to go around. And I think maybe let's dive into a little bit of like what brands you're loving right now, which ones are taking the risks, which ones are doing things differently that you've covered recently. I would love to hear some examples.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm always happy to share top performing sites, give people kind of inspiration boards. So one company I love is Whisperflow. So Whisperflow is a pretty interesting creative piece of tech in and of itself, where basically you can speak, you basically just talk and then it dictates and it's quite good. But from a website standpoint, a couple reasons I like it. Number one is it shows that a lot of times people will have this thought in their head, we either have to be functional or we have to be creative, right? They see it as like this binary decision that like, okay, we can be really creative and that's important, but then you lose all these functional pieces of clear CTA language, clear explanation of what you do, how you do it, who you're for. I think Whisperflow does a great job of doing both. If you go to their homepage, if you scroll through the experience, it's very creative, it has great visuals, and yet it still answers the core expectation to reality pieces that you should. It still has the core information that is going to make it index well in LLMs, right? So we know that structured schema, the layout, what you put in your footer, what you put in your header, having clear titles and subheaders, all of this stuff matters to you being indexed, right? And so the best sites are finding that ability to do those together. So Whisperflow is a great one. Another one that I like a little bit more in the startup realm is called Sundial, sundial.ai. Beautiful layout, great representation of visual design, but also simplicity and clarity. I like how they take a claim and then they have like a case study and like the justification and then like the data and they bundle it into a section together. And it's just this very nice flow where you're like, here's the key problem, here's how we solve it. Here's the key problem, here's how we solve it. And even their CTA language, it says like demo with founder. Again, this is startup, but
Mm,
like that's pretty clever because you're saying exactly what you're going to get. One of the challenges that even we have at DoWhatWorks, we're also a lean, small team where people meet with the founding team often on that first or second call. Same exact thing. People don't always know the value they're going to receive. There's a big difference to I'm going to hop on with an entry level AE or I'm going to hop on with a founder, right? So
yeah.
communicating that value, I think, is really clever. It is really smart.
I think what
Um,
I've heard, I think so. Firstly, Whisperflow, I just adopted that product maybe 4 weeks ago. It is mind blowing. I always hated voice to text because I always had to edit it. And then I realized this isn't just great at understanding what I'm saying, it's everywhere. I have one key on my laptop or my keyboard here that when I press it, I'm voice texting in Slack, I'm voice texting in email, I'm just voice to text in everything now. And I don't write anymore. Like I find myself, if I'm writing and typing on my keyboard, I find myself to be like, wait a second, I could just say this. So I just
yep.
firstly want to say I love their product. Their whole user experience is incredible. I feel like what I'm keep hearing you say is this CTA, like what do people do and what are the expectations when they click on the link, what actually happens? And I think like it's so interesting because when you're driving millions of dollars through paid ads to a website, people spend a lot of time optimizing that top of funnel part, right? Like how do we get the right people, how do we get in, how do we target them correctly, where are they showing up, where are ads, and they spend so much time optimizing those ads, and then they bring them to this website where it's just like standard, conversion rates might be whatever is the industry standard. And if they just went above and beyond and actually listened to somebody like you and said, let's make these tweaks and edits and do these A/B tests in real time, I think they could be a huge value add. So what I keep hearing you say is like, when I come to a website, what actually like firstly, I have very limited attention span, right? Attention spans are now shrunk to like, I want to know exactly what I need to get and I want to know it now or I'm bouncing immediately. And I think what you're saying is let's go one step further. Instead of just having a generic button, tell them exactly what that button's going to do so that when they've got that, you've got them on the hook and they're interested, that they know what they're doing when they click that button. So interesting. I feel like loads of companies can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, I think that's 100% spot on. And I'll add too that I think that a while back we always had this idea where they said, sell the benefit, don't sell the feature. And I think we're seeing an interesting kind of like fallback, if you will, that especially in this age of optimizing for machines too, you need to do two things. You need to optimize
Right.
for humans and you need to optimize for machines. And part of optimizing for machines is just being crystal clear around the queries that people are going to type in and representing that. And in some ways, that's kind of tied to SEO, right? There's a lot of parallels between SEO and GEO. But one of the differences with GEO specifically is around how important structure is, right? So, like, you really want to lean into being as clear as possible. Like, this is what we do. This is how we do it. This is who we best serve. This common use case, this is how we address that. Like, that type of stuff is going to index you more. And clearly laying it out across your page in the header, in the footer navigation. These are all things that matter a lot. And so I encourage people to be really clear with capability language. And I could
Mm.
share, I can't tell you how many tests that we've looked at, but folks can go to companies like Ramp, they can go to companies like Brex, I could list off hundreds of companies that have run direct tests on their subheader in their hero section, and what they've landed on. And these are for multi-product brands. Now, granted, this is really hard, right? This is a complex problem. I have 8 products. So companies tell me, Casey, how can I can't list all 8 of the things that I do, right, in my header. But go check out those companies, because Ramp, Brex, all those companies I just named, they all are in that same bucket. They also have tons of products. Look at how they just are really clear. Like, we do corporate cards, we do this, we do accounting. Like, they're super clear about that piece of it to set the stage. And I think that is what brands are testing into. That is what's showing higher conversions. So it's also a good example on that front.
And I think, the other thing is they're segmenting it by ICP and persona. So it's very quick for me to come to a website and be like, I identify with that because that's my job title. And then I go down that funnel and it's all optimized for what I care about most. Like that is the new age of doing things. In fact, I go to my website right now, and this is why I love doing this podcast, is I listen to, people educate me and I'm like, holy crap. And I send it to my team and I'm like, we need to do this immediately. And I feel like that's one thing we definitely want to get actioned on. We segmented a little bit and you gave us some advice on that, but it needs to be much better. So I'm going to get working on that. New tools today, just I want to come back to your point around like, how do we structure websites for the new age of crawling and bots to make sure that we're indexable in LLMs? I want to tell everyone, if anyone's watching this, I dropped my own website, which I'm very proud of. I think it's awesome. We custom built it, but I dropped it into Claude Code the other day. And I said, Claude, rip this apart for me. Tell me what I'm not doing and focus explicitly on what you can see, what you can't see, and what is not structured correctly. It came back 5 minutes, maybe even less, with the most comprehensive examples of exactly what I needed to change. And then it went and actually did it. It said, like, here, what you need to do. And then it was like, hey, give me access to Framer. I'm like, no, I'm not ready for that just yet, right? But I just think that in today's world, marketing leaders that are watching this, heads of growth watching this, there is no excuse. There's no excuse to be lazy. There's no excuse to sit back and just be like, yeah, I'll fix that eventually. It's literally like, take the URL, drop it into Claude Code, get it done right away.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think that especially for structural things, for technical things, it is very, very good at that piece of the equation. Now, one small word of caution that's informed kind of from my personal experience, one thing it is less good on is if you ask it, for example, should I include, if you go to your LLM right now and you say, like, should I include social logos on my website, right? I've cautioned that, yes, you can do this, but there's lots of ways for you to do it incorrectly. It'll say, not only will it say absolutely you should do logos, but the first article that it referenced, and this is in ChatGPT, by the way, the first article that it referenced for me was from 2016. It was an article from literally 10 years ago, was, and a
Wow.
company I'd never heard of, was the attribution. So for specific like tactical insights, I would be careful and I would make
Right.
sure you look very carefully at those citations. And I'd probably advise against using that as your A/B test roadmap. But for things that are technical in nature, in terms of formatting, in terms of schemata, in terms of site speed, it is excellent at those pieces. So totally echo that.
I want to tie that to something that I'm hearing recently, right? So we work with the likes of Webflow, HubSpot, Bill.com, ZoomInfo, pretty large enterprises, right? And they're doing paid content partnerships with creators across all social channels. And what we're hearing now from these companies that have been doing it for like 6 to 9 months is the LLM visibility is going up. The content that the creators are creating is being referenced in LLM. So it used to be that you do a paid content partnership with a creator and it's only as valuable as the organic reach that the algorithm lets it have, right? It kind of drops off after 3 or 4 weeks, let's say. Now that piece of content is indefinitely valuable because it can be referenced. And so I'm curious to hear, like, as you think about advising companies around content, let's say, what do you say when they say, hey, like, should I have more blog articles on my website? Should I have more, how do I get more citations? What's your recommendation around content? And that's a broad question. You can take whichever way you want.
Yeah, there's a lot of angles you can look at there, and obviously there's different channels. LinkedIn is one that is growing in prominence. Reddit is one that we could have a whole separate episode on Reddit. But here's the large overarching thing that I feel really strongly about. So, number one is you want to try to own the space and the category. The biggest mistake that teams are making is go to the creator, post this promo about how you can do this thing with this very specific feature of mine and go get 2,000 views, 3,000 views on your post versus trying to create the association between that brand and their category. When I publish content, my focus for myself is I want Casey and DoWhatWorks to be associated with website best practices. That's my category in my space. That's my focus. That's why I can talk to all these other brands, and we can chat if you want about, there's a really cool flywheel that we've built where we actually have other companies that are paying money to promote our content for free that we're building. It's awesome. But the whole mechanism is built on trying to own the category. And I think one of the biggest mistakes, and this includes in influencer marketing, in my opinion, is that people are way too bottom of funnel focused. And that I
Mm.
think is to their detriment. So that is like the first high level tip. When you work to own the category, that's what's going to create so much more of that visibility and ranking in LLMs. I recently had a post that I did, I think it was maybe a month and a half ago, about
Mm.
Supabase and something that they did with .txt in the bottom of their profile. That posted something incredibly interesting, right? Which is that after the first 72-hour window, it had, let's say, 12,000, 13,000 views. Did fine, right? Then suddenly I noticed, man, it keeps ticking up. It keeps ticking up. I checked a week later, it was at 40,000. A week later, it was at 70,000. I'm like, I'm not running any paid ads to this. No one else is running any paid ads to this. Like, what is happening with this thing? I started to look through the profile of my content on a weekly basis, and I found out something fascinating. I was like, on average, I do about 120 to 140,000 views a week. A huge chunk of this is coming from older
Mm.
content where I have things in there that are about key searchable terms, things around GEO, things around AEO seem to be doing particularly well. They're getting cited, they're getting picked up. So, to this point that you were kind of alluding to, but I'm kind of trying to bring together with my concrete experience, these things are getting picked up in LLMs and it's creating a long tail like I've never seen before. And the
Mm.
way that you get into that is the nature of your content. The type of content that is getting picked up is the type of content that is going to be widely cited and referenced. It's around an interesting trend, it's around an interesting discovery, right? That type of content gets tons of shares, it gets tons of distribution. But not only that, this part's key, it gets cited. So think about this idea that when a LinkedIn post is now cited from 100 blog articles, that is the signal to the LLM that this content is super valuable. All these people are citing it. And now
Right.
it starts to circulate, right? So that's one of the things you want to aim for. What would people cite and why?
I actually didn't even think about that. I was always thinking about the LLMs would just go and read LinkedIn. What you're actually saying is that there's publications that people are learning about different like things that are interesting and unique, and then they're talking about that and they're publishing it on their websites, and that's also really valuable. I want to come back to something you said, which I'm going to say it slightly differently, which is write for a person of one, right? So when you're thinking about copywriting, instead of copywriting generic broad, I've got all these people I want to serve and solve for. Alex Lieberman is the one that said this. I'm sure you know Alex. He was on a podcast recently with the HubSpot CMO Kip, and he talked a lot about this. He said, my number one person when I sit down to write content is Kip, the CMO of HubSpot. That's the only person I care about. That's the only person I write about. And what you're talking about, and like I'm running this podcast, we've got lots of LinkedIn experts, copywriters, lots of different conversations around how to grow on LinkedIn. The new algorithm favors people who start with a very clear, here's who I am and here's who I'm writing for. And I think that becomes very like important. But I think what the most important thing that you shared is like it needs to be knowledgeable. It needs to be insights that you can share personally, personal stories or examples, data that they can't get elsewhere. In today's world of LinkedIn and AI, everyone can write generic, optimized for the algorithm content, but they can't write from your point of view. And so my two pieces of advice is like number one, write for a person of one. And that goes for everything, not just like content writing on LinkedIn. It's website, it's email, it's your sales messages, it's so many different things. And then number two, like share the real insights, share behind the stories, and like share like things that people can't get elsewhere, and make it really valuable. Because the way that these algorithms are working now is like shares and saves are way more important than just likes. And so it's a really interesting insight that you shared. I don't know if that resonates with you, of like, have you ever heard that before? Write for a person of one.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great lesson. I 100% agree with that. And the only other extra dimension I would even add beyond that is I think also build for distribution. So part of all this stuff I'm talking about is building for distribution. What specifically does that mean is that a good example of this is Rand Fishkin. If you guys aren't familiar with Rand Fishkin of SparkToro, former founder of Moz, he does a great job. I have chatted with him multiple times and he talks about this exact same philosophy, which is like, I build visuals that people will share inside of Slack, that people will share inside of Teams, that make it really easy for them to cite. That type of philosophy is key. That's super important, right? It's the same type of headspace or mindset around building content that is featuring other teams that they're naturally going to want to put in their newsletter, that they're naturally going to want to reshare, that they're going to want to proliferate, which is one of my core strategies, right? Like that piece of it creates the flywheel. And I think the big moats we have right now, proprietary data, distribution. Those are the two power moats in the age of AI, in my opinion, that are going to differentiate your brand. And if you do not have a distribution engine, if you don't have a strong way, a playbook of getting that, your alternative is a very expensive paid version, right? That's what you get otherwise. You either build that distribution engine in your strategy, or, and I know many companies that are in this bucket, you pump millions and millions of dollars into highly inefficient ads or highly inefficient paid channels to replicate that same success.
I feel like you just answered the next question I was going to ask you, which is like, let's transition to the future, right? We're thinking heads of marketing, heads of demand gen, heads of brand and social. People listening to this is usually mid-cap and enterprise clients. You know, they're under pressure right now. They're trying to figure out, where do I put my energy and resources? And the question I had for you is like, where should they be focusing their energy and effort? And what do you think they should stop doing?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't want to, parrot, if you will, but I think that like where I would be spending my energy as a marketer would be owning the category, right? So to give again some specific examples, Gusto, Ramp, these companies in the financial space, they've actually brought on economists, and those economists are writing content that is about labor reports, about hiring, about all the core areas and categories that they serve, right? They're bringing on journalists, they're bringing on economists, they're bringing on people to help them own the category. Because when you own the category, you not only own the attention sphere, you're getting people to come back, you're following, but you also are tapping into the GEO, the SEO, all of this whole bucket, right, of discoverability. And so I think that is one of the biggest misses, and where I strongly encourage people to go out and create their own assets, right? Work with influencers. By the way, one of my hot takes, if you will, that I think is still so underdone is go find influencers to run owned assets for you. So few companies are doing this, and I think this is a huge missed opportunity. Go find an influencer to run a newsletter. Go find an influencer to run a podcast. You own it as the brand. You own the lead flow. You own the attention. If the influencer leaves, you still have the asset. It's under your name, but that influencer gets paid, whatever it is, $3,000, $4,000 to hop on and record an episode with someone or to write out a newsletter. The benefit is you get this way stronger long tail. You imagine this world where you have 10 different awesome influencers in your space all running newsletters, right? Maybe only two of those take off. But this is like the VC world, right? We understand this. If two of those newsletters get to 50,000 people, 100,000 people, that's a tremendous success,
That's
right?
an incredible insight. Okay, so selfishly, I speak with lots of like mid-cap enterprise clients, and I'm like, okay, how is your influencer strategy today? And I start with, actually, what's your employee advocacy program like today? And often they're like, we have a couple of people who post content. It's now a priority. We're trying to get more people to do it. So I love the idea of actually getting an influencer and bringing them in-house on like a retainer and contract to create content for you. That's really interesting insight. I actually think more companies are going to do that. In fact, I just did it selfishly. I just brought on our new head of content, Shoaib, and he is unbelievable. And he just runs content across the whole company, right? So it's a really interesting insight. I think I'm very fascinated with making your subject matter experts internally, your employees, become content creators and create that content flywheel. But I love the idea of like actually bringing somebody in-house as well to consult with and to create content with and to amplify that, because you can work with influencers, you can do your employee advocacy, you can bring influencers in-house to create content. Everything that you're saying is you need a distribution engine. You need to have really good content. You need to do it consistently. And the product and the features and the functionality will all become somewhat the same because of AI. Everything's just moving so fast that brand, social, distribution are the moats. Invest in that heavily.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's spot on. And the advantage there is that they have the distribution out of the gate. I'm also a big fan of trying to activate employees. And I ran a whole program and active campaign. We can share lessons there if you want. The challenge you have is that a lot of those people starting out don't have any distribution. Now, I want to be clear. It's not that you can't change that. I actually have lots of stories where I can tell folks. We ran something called the 10K Club. And the 10K Club just means that you started from, wherever you started, often it was zero, to getting 10,000 impressions a week. And that was a cool milestone. I got 10,000 impressions on LinkedIn this week. And I like to show people how fast they could do that. You can literally do that in under a month with like no followers, right? And so there is this ability to do it. But that being said, there is also a great utility in existing distribution networks, existing trust. Those things take time to do well. If you look at Lenny Podcast, if you look at SaaStr, if you look at 20VC, these high distribution points, those are long-term investments, right? These folks have been around for a decade building that trust, building those audiences. So I do think there's utility in bringing those partnerships up front.
Yeah, well, you don't just get the distribution, you get the trust. They have built trust through years of creating content. So I 100% agree with you. I feel like there's so much knowledge that you just dropped on this audience, and the people listening to this are going to be thinking like, where do I get more out of Casey? So where do people find you?
Yeah. So the first thing is just my LinkedIn, Casey Hill, right? You'll see the guy who's talking about website stuff. That's probably about 90% of my content. I also do a good amount of share in public. It's kind of funny that my website stuff is now like the very dominant lever and the share in public, not so much. But I personally, maybe I'm biased, think that the playbooks and share in public stuff can help some folks out. But yeah, go start there. And then we also have a DoWhatWorks, which is my company named Substack. And that's good for people that want the next layer of depth. So as I kind of said, like LinkedIn is a lot of the novelty experiments. This is an interesting thing you might not have seen and you might want to go test. The newsletter is a lot more of like the tried and true. What does the actual data say? What are the actual tests saying? Like the one layer deeper in the kind of execution layer side of it. So yeah, we publish that every week as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I can speak from experience. I love your content on LinkedIn, but I love the long form content, hitting my inbox, getting that really in detail. Sometimes I'm not able to sit down and read the whole thing from start to finish, but I always like save it or resend it back to myself to then read it later. So I love that long form content where you can go deeper. Casey, thanks for being a friend. Thanks for joining us. This was awesome. I think we're going to absolutely have to do this again, but want to say thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Safe Doesn't Scale on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Limelight is the leading AI-powered B2B influencer marketplace and social signals platform. Brands like HubSpot, Webflow, and ZoomInfo use Limelight to power influencer programs at scale. Start your first campaign at limelihq.com.